How did we get from here
to here?
Let's shed some light on it. Hello and welcome once again to the Darkened Room of Music Conversation. I'm Chris.
And I'm Darren, and what are we going to talk about today?
Man, you know, it's hard to believe that in the entire history of the human race, recorded mediums have only been around for 163 years.
Wow.
And you think about the entirety of the amount of time we've been around on the planet Earth, that's like nothing.
This is true. I never thought of it like that.
Yeah. March 25th, 1857 was when it all began.
Wow.
And we're going to kind of show you the journey from that point to where we are today with streaming media. And we think it's kind of fascinating. And, you know, we're not going to get too technical on it, right?
Yeah, this is basically an overview of the history of how it started, all the way to the point, like you said, how we got to where we are today.
Yeah.
Without a lot of scientific talk. Not many nerd alerts in this episode.
Right. So it all started on that date I just mentioned, March 25th, 1857, with a device called the phonograph. Now, this was a device that was invented as
Never heard of it.
Yeah. It's invented as a laboratory instrument for the study of acoustics.
Okay.
It transcribed, I'm reading here, it transcribed sound waves from a line traced on smoke-blackened paper or glass. Now, this machine, you couldn't actually play back from. You could only record the sound waves.
Okay.
So this was the first step in recorded music, but as far as being able to listen to what you recorded, not there yet.
Gotcha.
Yeah. After that, you know, some inventions, you know, kind of came along that were important. You know, 1883, the piano roll came out. So those pianos that play by themselves.
Yeah.
1886 was the music box disc, which is like a jewelry box, and it plays the little dinky type of sound. All of those had to be pre-manufactured ahead of time, though.
Right.
And the point came finally in the late 1800s when you could actually record something and play it back right there on the same device, and those were the cylinders. And I'm going to show a picture on the screen of one as an example here.
Ooh, look at that thing.
Yeah. So yeah, basically that physical needle would actually groove into that cylinder, and then you could play back on the same machine.
And what year was that?
That was late 1800s.
Okay.
Yeah, several incarnations of it came along, so there's not a specific date as to when the first one came out. But that's about the time that it came out. Now, magnetic recording, as you know, like reel-to-reels, as you think of cassettes and all that, that actually started out as an invention called a wire recorder. And it wasn't physical tape, it was an actual thin piece of wire thread between two spools where you could record and play it back. That was the precursor to the tape, which is coming.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, 1901, this is where we're getting into familiar territory.
New century. Hello.
Yes. 1901.
Welcome to 1901.
This little invention here.
Ooh, that's a 78.
This is a 78. Yeah.
10-inch, also known as a 10-inch.
These were very popular, and, you know, consumers could, you know, they were cheap enough for consumers to have. I actually have one here from the Jimmy Dorsey group. This is like 1940 when this came out.
That thing looks thick.
It's very thick.
Wow.
Tap it. Feel it. Heavy, too.
Very heavy.
Yeah.
Yeah, they don't make them like this anymore.
Yeah. So, yeah, that was a very popular format.
Yeah.
And not long after that, well, actually, like 3 decades after that, so that was kind of long, the wire recorders morphed into reel-to-reel magnetic tape. And this is where, you know, radio stations could use it. You got an example of one over here,
yes,
right?
we do.
Yeah.
We have Mr. Glenn Campbell right here.
Yeah, there we go. And so, yeah, the reel-to-reel tapes, they stayed around for decades. You know, radio stations especially would use them. You would use it in a recording studio. It was easy to edit with the razor blade and the tape.
Right. And this is what the tape itself looked like
right
here.
Yeah.
Oh.
So, yeah. So this was a really useful device for radio stations and recording studios, but you didn't see a lot of, like, consumers buying reel-to-reels.
Right.
So, you know, the record industry was kind of like, you know, they were releasing the 78s, and they were wanting to improve the quality. Now, as we go along here, that's one thing that you'll see. Things tend to flip from convenience to sound quality, then back to convenience in spite of sound quality. We kind of flip-flop.
We're creatures of habit.
That's right.
And it proves it. And you're so right. I've thought about that myself. It's like they improve the sound, and then how can we make it more convenient? How can we improve the sound? How can we make it more convenient? And that is it's a seesaw that happens over and over again in this little musical ride.
It did, though I think in modern times we're done with that, and we'll touch on that as we get towards the end.
Yes, we will.
All right, so the 78s were convenient. They were great. They didn't sound that great.
Right.
So development began on a replacement format, and Columbia Records in, what's the date here?
1948.
Released the
that
vinyl LP. This right here, as we know it today, was developed in 1948. Now, Columbia Records, I think, the reason for the popularity, they released so many different releases on the day that this came out.
And that's a 12-inch.
This is a 12-inch, yeah. Yeah, the 78s were 10-inch.
Yeah, I mentioned that.
Yeah, the 12-inch...
Two more inches.
Okay, yeah, 2 more inches. Hey, it matters. So that's what everyone knows today, the vinyl LP. And it's the one that's actually stuck around. It's gone away for a little bit in the CD age, but, this is the dinosaur that people, still love.
Still enjoy it.
Still love it. It sounds good.
It sure does.
That's the important part. And it really took off, too, because what they released on it was like jazz standards and classical music and pop standards.
Right.
So, there was a market for that, and people wanted to own those things and play at home. So I think that's one of the reasons the popularity of that took off the way it did. Yeah. And then, of course, 1949, a year later, it was only natural. How can we release singles? The 45.
Right.
Was
Once again, for convenience.
Exactly, for convenience. Yeah, a lot of people debate 45s don't quite sound as good as LPs.
I disagree.
Yeah. I think it just depends on the way it was manufactured, but it was designed for convenience.
Yes.
Yeah. So at that point, everything was mono. Finally, stereo recordings came along.
1957?
1957.
Yeah.
The stereophonic LP was released. So now you could have stereo sound, but one of the reasons, I'm going to show this on camera here. Let me see if I can get this focused in. See how it says side A?
I never looked better.
Stereo.
Yes.
The reason you'd see stereo on so many releases is because you would have a mono version and a stereo version, because record players that were mono couldn't play back both channels. It couldn't play both channels of the stereo. Yeah. So people that eventually bought a stereo console or turntable, they could play both versions. But if you didn't have a stereo console, then the mono is what you had to buy.
Right.
So both of them were on the market at the same time.
And it was interesting, just to add a little bit to that, as time went on throughout the 60s, 70s, even into the early 80s, there were still a lot of AM radio stations that were playing popular music or country music or whatever. And up until even the early 80s, they were still releasing things or pressing things up in stereo and mono for that reason.
That's very true.
FM radio would play the stereo version, and AM, would play the mono version.
That's exactly right, yeah. All right, so that took the world by storm, and then they began thinking about, okay, how can we make things more convenient? You can't play a record in your car.
That's right.
Even to this day, I don't think they've been able to figure that out.
Not a good idea.
No. So, the automobiles were becoming really, really popular throughout the 50s, and so they were thinking about the reel-to-reel. How can we shrink it down and make it a little more accessible and more durable and all that? So the first incarnation, 1958, was the tape cartridge, and it was basically 2 little mini reel-to-reels in a plastic casing. This was the precursor to the cassette.
Right.
Also, a year later, something called the radio cart came out. Now, this was exclusively for radio stations, and it looks like an 8-track. It was the precursor to the 8-track.
Right. Yeah. But a smaller amount of tape.
Yeah, smaller amount of tape, and it runs faster.
Right.
So that was developed for radio stations because they were playing singles, 45s, over and over and over, and they would get all scratchy. This was a way to save the sound quality.
There you go.
Yeah. So both of those inventions were precursors to what was about to come to the consumer market. 1962, we saw the birth of the cassette.
The cassette.
This is something you could play in your car. I remember seeing old vintage ads of cassette decks when they first came out for the car.
All right.
Sound quality was pretty good. Probably not as good as a vinyl LP, especially in 1962.
Right.
But that was about the convenience.
Yeah.
Yeah. And 1965, we saw the 8-track, which was a modification of the radio cart.
Right. They actually developed the 8-track in probably 63 or so. I think it actually hit the consumer market, but Ford took the lead in this. They installed 8-track players in their cars.
Yeah.
In their new cars in 1965. So that really gave them an edge. And the popularity of the 8-track grew because of convenience, all the things that you mentioned. Obviously, it's not a good idea to play a vinyl LP in your car. Although, believe it or not, they actually had vinyl players for cars.
I believe Elvis owned one, didn't he?
He sure did.
Yeah.
I've seen that, actually.
Yeah.
So the 8-track was a step up in that, sense, in that it's not going to skip and all of that. So 8-tracks, actually had a little bit of a popular run there because they were installed in a lot of new cars, a lot of higher end cars and stuff at the time. And these little guys did serve a purpose. This is my Wichita Lineman original 8-track tape here. And but there was a downside to 8-tracks. Number one, they were really difficult to record on. I don't know if you ever had a machine that recorded 8-track tapes. I did when I was a kid.
Yeah.
And they were pretty squirrely. You would be recording something and then the tape would switch over. Yeah. Another thing was the machine themselves. Now, we're not going to get too nerdy here, but the tape head on an 8-track moves. Mm-hmm. And when it does that, it puts a lot of strain on the tape. And sometimes the tape would get chewed up, pulled out. Sometimes it would get reversed. I don't know if it would play it backwards or play it in reverse. Yeah. It would sound like crap.
Yeah.
It would sound really, take your jacket and throw it over your speakers and push play, and that's basically what it would sound like, and there was no coming back from that.
Yeah.
So it did have a downside. So the 8-track, as great as it was for convenience for a little while, the downside of being tough to record, problems with the tape, and all of these things kind of eventually led manufacturers to do what? Look for something more
convenient.
That's the right answer.
That's right. And that's when cassettes really started to take off in popularity. That was in the late 60s and throughout the 70s.
Yes.
Yeah. Much more durable and easy to record on and play back.
Right.
We have a cassette right here. And of course, they looked like this when they were first released. So yeah, as you can see, it was like, not clear shell. That's how they came out originally.
Right. They just had like a paper sticker on there with the title on there.
Yeah.
And if the tape was messed up on the inside, it was pretty much game over.
Pretty much, yeah.
You pretty much had to toss it unless you really knew what you were doing, and you could glue it back together.
Yeah.
So that was an issue with this initially. But eventually, they compensated for that. Mm-hmm. Check this out. Now, this is a newer cassette tape. And if you notice, it's translucent. Is that the right word?
Translucent, yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And there's screws in there. If you can see those.
See the screws in the corners. It's not really focusing on it, but
you get the idea.
Yeah.
If there's trouble with the tape on the inside, you can actually take a screwdriver, take it apart, do a little surgery.
Yes.
And I did that a lot.
Me too.
Back in the day.
Especially with the little pressure pad.
Yeah.
That's inside right there. That actually presses it against the head.
I'm an expert at changing those things.
Yeah.
I've done it many, many times.
And if you're old enough too, you'll remember sticking a pencil in the little reels
and going
there.
Rewind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And getting it right back to the spot you want. Or if it came out of your player and it was all like rolled out, pencil rolled it right back up.
Right. Yeah. And let me say this about cassettes and about formats in general. Most every format can sound really good on the right equipment.
That's right.
If it's been mastered properly. It wasn't until much, much later. I grew up with I had a whole cavalcade of cheap cassette decks growing up. And so I never really heard a really good quality cassette deck until much, much later.
Yeah.
And I scored an Onkyo that was a high-end machine from the 80s. That was a 3-head. Once again, I'm not going to get too technical here, but 3 heads mean you have 1 head to record, 1 head to play, and 1 head to erase. And the more that you can dedicate the 3 to a specific job, the better it will sound.
Right.
There's 2-head machines, and some of them sound fantastic as well, but 3 heads were the top line.
3 heads are better than 1.
3 heads are better than 2. So anyway, I heard, much, much later an Onkyo, and I think the actual model number was a TA2058, and it was a top-of-the-line Onkyo Integra from like 1986. It was calibrated correctly, and it sounds amazing.
Yeah.
I own one to this very day, and I love it. And then there's even higher-end machines that people will pay literally, now get this, for a vintage Nakamichi Dragon cassette deck. People pay upwards of $3,000 for those things. And I've heard one, and they sound unbelievable.
Yeah.
So once again, all formats can sound really good on the right equipment, and with cassettes, it's very important that things are aligned correctly, calibrated correctly.
Yeah.
So,
but when you're talking consumers, most consumers, as far as cassettes go, they didn't own, those brands. They owned like a Pioneer or a Realistic from Radio Shack.
Yeah, which Pioneer made really good stuff in the 70s, by the way.
They did, yes.
Very good.
But, still, there was a way to improve the sound quality and the durability.
Yep.
So now we're going to
1982, baby.
Make the leap to sound quality. What comes along then?
Well, that would be the compact digital disc.
There we go. And now we did a whole entire episode on the CD. So we're not going to spend too much detailed time on this, but this was
Watch that episode. It was really good.
This was indeed a game changer. And
Yes,
boy,
it
did
was.
CDs explode. Cassettes kind of faded to the background. LPs faded almost completely away. We thought they were going to die out.
Yeah, I mean, for a while, the compact disc did make the vinyl LP basically obsolete. Mm-hmm. It really did. Now, it didn't die for good. It was still burning in the embers deep within the underneath the I don't know. But anyway, well, it came back to life.
Yes.
It was crazy. The vinyl eventually became born again, and that should be an episode too. The revolution of vinyl.
That's a great idea. I think
write
we'll
that down.
look for that one coming soon.
Yeah, but at any rate, the compact disc lasted. It had a really good run for a couple of decades, and like Chris said, we did a whole episode on that. So we'll
go back
on.
and check that out. But it definitely sparked the age of digital audio.
Yes.
All right, so the compact disc brought along the digital age.
Yes.
The desire for digital audio, the better sounding quality. Everyone was all about that. So they were thinking of a way, how can we replace the cassette and make the cassette more convenient? Mm-hmm. So they came up, first of all, with the digital audio tape. And this was designed probably more with professional studios
For sure.
in mind.
I was a musician, and I could tell you that the studios from the late 80s all the way into probably the mid 90s, it was a standard. The DAT tape was, most people mix the mixes down anyway to DAT tape.
That's correct.
And they sounded great. I have a little issue with the durability in retrospect somewhat, but it was still a great format and obviously very small and easy to
As you
store.
can see, it looks like a mini VCR tape. It's
Yes.
kind of what it looks like.
Yeah.
And it operates kind of the same way.
Yeah, but they sound really good. They sound excellent.
All right, so studios made that a standard. Didn't really hit the consumer market all that hard.
Right. Now, we did learn, and I didn't know this until we did research for this episode, that they actually, in the UK, released a few titles anyway, to consumers, of popular music on the DAT format.
That is correct.
We learned there was like the Smiths had a title.
New
I think,
Order.
New Order. Yeah, there was a few of them, and they're very valuable if you ever run into one.
Yeah, but they are extremely rare.
Extremely
You'll
rare.
probably never find.
And I never knew that. I
Yeah.
never, ever heard that in my life. So you learn something every day.
Indeed. You learn something every episode right here in the Darkened Room.
Yes, you do. That's why you're watching, hopefully.
All right, so studios were using the digital audio tape as their standard in the background, unbeknownst to most people in the public realm.
Yeah.
This little small computer company called Apple in 1988 started working on audio digitally on computers. They invented the AIFF, meaning the audio interchange file format. And this was the precursor to the MP3.
Wow, 1988.
1988, yeah. So that was like a dark rumbling underground. No one knew what was coming.
Right.
And nothing happened consumer-wise on that. That's just a milestone that we need to note before we move forward.
Okay, noted.
Right.
There will be a quiz later.
Right. So by 1992, they were trying to figure out, how to make the digital audio tape more consumer-friendly and to outright replace the cassette, because cassettes were still hanging on at that point.
Yes, they were. And I can tell you from being in music retail at the time, we were still selling a lot of cassette tapes.
Yeah. So they came up with the mini disc. So this is a recordable, tiny little, this is 80 minutes.
Yeah.
You fit 80 minutes on, remarkably at the time, if you looked at this, like you could fit that much on this little
Something
tiny thing.
really
It's
small
really, really thin.
and very durable too.
So they released these. They came out with the car stereo units. You had a home unit. We even had a Walkman.
You could record on them easily.
It's so small, that it's easy to carry around.
Right.
So they really thought that this was going to take off quite well. Of course, the rumblings of the digital file format on computers was underground, so they didn't quite see that coming.
Right.
But yeah, there was actually commercial releases. This is the Forrest Gump soundtrack, and I love how it sits in the little cradle.
And it kind of looks
here.
like a floppy disk.
It really does. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's got the little door on the back.
Right.
That slides open when you put it in the player.
And I can tell you, I was not interested in this format at all when it was new. I was comfortable with CDs, and I was buying a lot of CDs at the time.
Yeah.
But later, I got a player, and I have to say that they sound really good.
Yeah.
They really do sound well.
Yeah.
And I don't know if we said this earlier too. This was supposed to replace the cassette was the idea. Cassettes by the late 80s sounded fantastic.
Yeah.
They really did. They came a long way.
Right.
But by the 80s, I felt like they sonically had really gotten good.
You're exactly right. But still, they were wanting to push that digital audio because everyone thought it was better.
And once again, you got to think about how these big companies were looking at it. They were still at the we talk about convenience and sound. Cassettes this is my opinion, got better sounding in the late 80s into the 90s because they were trying to compete with the CD.
Exactly right.
The CD sounded really good. So they're like, well, let's try to make the cassettes sound as good as possible because we still got them beat by like $5. And it worked. It was still hanging on for convenience sake, if nothing else. So.
Exactly right. Yeah, the public latched onto the CD, though.
Yeah.
And by the time computers had become more and more popular, you started getting CD burners in your computer. You could make your own mix CD. So this, it was a little popular at first, but it just kind of faded into oblivion.
And once again, that was popular as far as people recording like bands live.
Yes.
Because they made those players a little more mobile than the DAT players, which were professional decks that you had to kind of set up. To your point, they had mobile players that were a lot more accessible with the mini disc, so a lot of people would take those to concerts and record. And
yeah. Hide them in their jacket and hide the microphones in their hat. Yeah. I actually witnessed someone doing that once.
Oh, okay.
At a Counting Crows concert. It was funny. All right, so the mini disc kind of faded away, but something else was going on in the underground once again. The popularity of home PCs were beginning to look like more and more people would be owning computers.
Yeah.
In 1993, the MP3 was invented. Yeah, now I don't know who invented it or whatever. I didn't make my notes on that. But just, again, a milestone we need to keep in mind of what's about to come. 1997, we'll just move forward.
Yeah.
The DVD came out. The DVD, of course, replaced VHS for movies at home.
Very similar to the compact disc taken over for the cassette. The DVD did the same thing with VHS.
That's right.
Yeah.
So, with the DVD format out, the music industry tried to develop something along the same lines, because there was more storage on a DVD. You could fit more data on a DVD.
That's exactly right.
1999. What came out then, Darren?
The DVD audio. Now check this out. Really weird how history works. And when you look at this in retrospect, it's like some of this stuff didn't work and they didn't learn their lesson from before. So we talked about in the CD episode how everybody held hands and sang Kumbaya and worked together on creating the CD format. Well, they didn't do that with high resolution audio.
Nope.
It split off in a couple of fashions. Fashions? What am I saying here? Factions. Look it up. But there was also a format that came around called the Super Audio CD around the same time. And if you can hold this up and you can take it out and show it. That is a Super Audio CD, which is high resolution music to compete with head-to-head the DVD audio. So basically the difference was this. With an SACD, you had 1 bit, but the sample rate was crazy high. It was like over 2,800 samples.
Show the disc itself.
2,800 kilohertz per bit. The difference between that versus a DVD audio is 24-bit, but the sample rate is only 192 kilohertz. So you see the difference there.
Yeah.
More bits, less sample rate. 1 bit and more sample rates.
Right.
So that was kind of the difference.
I have no clue what that means.
Look it up. There's people that explain this stuff way better than I ever could, and we don't want to get too deep in the weeds on this stuff.
Right.
My broader point is this. They had a format war. With SACDs, when they first hit the market, you had to have a specific SACD player to even play it.
Yeah.
So if you turn around backwards, there we go. There's a little notation that this plays in only
down at the bottom?
SACD players only. So if you were going to invest in that format, you had to have a unique player just to play this.
Right.
So one of the upsides to the SACD was they did offer surround sound mixes, which was becoming really popular. Obviously, that was a direct reaction to DVD audio.
Yes.
Because that was one of the things that DVD audio offered. And I've got one right here if you want to show this. This is Stone Temple Pilots. This is the core album. And it does have a surround sound mix on there that you can listen to.
Yeah.
So a lot of the same old War Horses, older albums that had already been released, they would reissue them with a brand new surround sound mix. Metallica did it. But then also the newer albums that were coming out, like Santana Supernatural at the time.
Yeah.
It had its own mix, stereo mix, and PCM and all that, high resolution. So
Yeah.
so that was kind of, once again, they were going after the audiophile, market
Exactly right.
with this stuff. So this was less about convenience. I would say, to some degree, the DVD audio was about convenience because they knew that people had bought into that technology.
Right.
And if they had a player that could decode it anyway, they may as well, hey, let's get them buying music too. They're buying all these movies. So that made a little bit of sense.
Right.
I think with the SACD, I don't think that they implemented the rollout very intelligently. However, the format took off big time with audiophiles. I love the format. I own several hundred of them. And to this day, they still press stuff on SACD that's released new titles all the time, especially in Japan and in Europe and other markets.
Yeah.
So then the record labels were like, well, we got to get in on this. So what they tried to do, their reaction to the high resolution audio, is they started coming out with these guys here, which is called the dual disc. I personally thought this was a brilliant idea. It was a two-sided disc. One side played regular old CD quality sound. The other side was either DVD or high resolution audio or surround sound mixes as well. So if you look at the disc, that's a Miles Davis. That's the
CD on that side.
Yep, and you flip it over.
Flip it over, and here you've got. It's going to focus on me. Yep, DVD side.
There you go.
Yep.
So I thought that was a really great idea, and it totally crashed at the box office. It's really crazy. I think we looked this up. There was like 200 releases or something.
Yeah.
And then it was done for, never to be heard from again. But I thought that was an example of the timing wasn't good. People had really bought into the idea of downloading and buying the same old War Horses again, like Kind of Blue. I fell for it, but a lot of people didn't. And then right at the finish line of all of this going on, you started seeing this. You started seeing the hybrid SACDs, like this one of Incubus. It would play the high resolution audio as well as the regular CD side.
Yep.
And here's the same title except the dual disc. So the industry was all discombobulated at this point. And with all of these things hitting the consumers all at once, none of them really stuck that well, I guess, with the exception of DVD audio. I guess in the end, it kind of won out.
The audiophiles definitely picked up on that because, and I have a theory as to why all of this failed.
Yeah.
The dual disc came out in 2003.
Right.
What came just before that? 1999, Napster goes live on the internet.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Now we're talking convenience.
Yes.
Now you can get your music for free. You don't have to pay anybody.
Right.
And there was, everyone kind of remembers what happened there. There was legal battles. There were arrests. They were actually trying to prosecute people for downloading from Napster.
And it hit the industry completely blindsided and very hard.
Yes.
At that time, it did affect the industry.
Yeah.
I mean, overnight, immediately.
Yeah.
And then that led to the battle. Then became, how do should we embrace this technology and figure out a way, and then kind of bring us up to speed? What happened after that?
I really think the record labels dropped the ball on this. They decided to fight against it.
Yeah.
Thankfully, though, you remember that company I mentioned called Apple?
I remember them, yeah.
Yeah. And the MP3, those were important milestones because now, in 2001, yes, the iTunes and the AAC format, they actually improved upon the MP3 format. iTunes goes live. That's the major event. Apple wanted to figure out a way to help the record company and the music industry still monetize the music, but keep it convenient and cheap for the consumers. And you would think, after a couple of years of everyone being used to all of these illegal download sites, that it probably wouldn't take off because everyone's used to free now.
Right.
But lo and behold, it worked.
It did.
Yeah, the iPod came out. It was convenient, put in your pocket. I think the whole umbrella of that marketing scheme is really what helped save the music industry from the MP3.
And I don't disagree. And I do have a question, though. What did they do for the audio files?
For the audio files, they actually had lossless type MP3 files. They had FLAC.
Right.
Apple had its own lossless format. Of course, the Wave, which was developed by Microsoft. You could have lossless audio and still put it on your iPod.
Right.
Yeah.
So everybody was happy. Everybody was getting along again.
Exactly. And that pretty much knocked all of the physical media format off the table.
Yeah.
And that's why when the dual disc came out, it just probably didn't take off.
The timing was bad.
And the audiophiles were already used to and loved the SACD and the DVD audio stuff.
Right.
So there was no need to improve on it.
And once again, what's really strange about that whole SACD and DVD audio battle, which once again, they didn't want that with the CD format, but then they did this and had it.
Yeah.
Even though DVD audio, DVD is still a pretty relevant format today. The audiophiles actually picked SACD over it. They actually liked SACD better.
That's right, yeah.
So it's just really weird the way, kind of like Betamax, people said that's better than VHS. So history repeats itself. And you know why history repeats itself? It's because human behavior is the same. The faces and the dates change, but human behavior is always the same.
That's right. All right. Well, thanks to Apple, thanks to iPod, we now have things like Spotify.
I want to look at that.
Now we're streaming.
Yeah.
And it's even more convenient than ever, even though the sound quality is not there.
Right.
We kind of split off into two different factions. There's a small group of audiophiles who still want to hold it in their hands and have it sound as good as possible.
Yep.
And there are others who just want to plug their phone into their car and have
a good time.
The whole world of music at their fingertips.
Right.
Yeah.
Just like the people in 1965 wanted to do with their 8-tracks.
That's exactly right. It all comes back full circle.
Full circle.
Yeah.
That's right.
So there you go. Hope you enjoyed the journey through the physical format.
Wow, I'm
world.
tired. I'm hungry. Let's go get something to eat.
Thanks for watching this episode of In a Darkened Room. Darren and Chris welcome your comments. You can leave your thoughts and opinions in the comments section below. Follow In a Darkened Room on Twitter to receive updates and submit your ideas for what we should discuss in upcoming episodes. Darren and Chris are also on Instagram, so give them a follow there as well. All of these links can be found in the description below. While you're there, be sure to click subscribe and ring the bell.
All right, it's our random topic time, and lo and behold, how ironic it is, it's time for Spotify's Shuffle Play.
Timing's everything.
Open up Spotify here. I'm going to hit shuffle and see
Shuffle.
what song comes up, and we're going to talk about it. Here we go. Looks like Misunderstanding by Genesis.
All right, from 1980, Misunderstanding off the Duke album.
Yeah.
I love this song. I do think that it was one of those moments in their career where Phil, you got to remember, this is like a year before In the Air Tonight.
Yes.
But I do think that song really set them up for their 80s run.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I think that was the moment that a lot of pop bands really took notice and was like, man, this stuff is getting pretty accessible now.
Yeah.
And a lot of their longtime fans, we're still hanging on and love that album, love that era, not as much as the 70s art rock stuff. But I love the song. I think it's
I do
great.
too. And yeah, you you can laugh at the main character in this song, like how he was being such a sucker with this woman.
Yeah.
Doing him wrong left and right. But if you really think about it, over the years, when we were younger, you were probably this guy at some point.
Guilty as charged.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah. Well, man,
right.
this was a fun episode.
This was
man.
great. Very informative. I hope it wasn't too much for you, but
Yeah.
if it was, we'll be back with another episode.
If it was, blame the editor, not us.
That's right. Hey, that's me.
Oh.
All right,
Thank you,
guys.
everybody.
See you next time. Take care.